Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Kentucky. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you are watching from and the exact time you are listening to this narration. We are interested in knowing to what places and at what times of day or night these documented stories reach. The autumn of 1907 arrived in Harlan County with unusual stillness. Pine Mountain cast long shadows over the valleys below, where several hunting cabins dotted the landscape along the Cumberland River. According to county records preserved in the Harlan County Historical Society, between September and December that year, 7 men who ventured into these woods for the hunting season never returned to their homes. The official disappearances were documented in ledgers that have since yellowed with age. Each entry was written in the meticulous cursive of County Clerk Thomas Whitfield. Each man was listed with his age, occupation, last known location, and a brief notation. No remains recovered. Local newspapers, primarily the Harlan Daily Enterprise, reported these disappearances as separate incidents, likely attributed to harsh weather conditions or wild animal attacks. The editorial from October 28, 1907, suggested that the wilderness claims its due each season. This sentiment reflected the casual acceptance of the dangers posed by the Appalachian wilderness in that era. But a series of journals discovered in 1962, during the renovation of an old homestead, suggested that something far more disturbing had occurred in those woods. The renovation project was part of a federal initiative to develop recreational areas within what would later become the Daniel Boone National Forest. The property, approximately 23 miles southeast of Harlan proper, had been abandoned for decades. According to the work crew's foreman, Samuel Ledbetter, whose account was recorded in an internal Forest Service memorandum dated June 17, 1962, the journals were found beneath a loose floorboard in what had once been the main living area of a substantial log cabin. The journals belonged to Tobias and Elijah Blackwood, brothers who own approximately 300 acres of dense woodland in the southeastern portion of the county. The land deed, filed in 1876 and transferred to the brothers in 1899 following their father's death, described the property as rising from Cumberland waters to the ridge of Pine Mountain, encompassing Bear Creek Hollow and the eastern face of Stony Point. The journals, 3 leather-bound volumes with pages made of handmade paper, contained daily entries spanning from 1899 to late 1907. What follows is an account pieced together from these journals, county records, newspaper clippings, and interviews conducted with descendant of Harlan County residents from that time. The investigation was never officially concluded, and in 1967, the case was permanently archived in Kentucky State Historical Society, where it remains largely forgotten. The Blackwood brothers were known in McCreary County, the neighboring jurisdiction, as reclusive trappers who occasionally traded animal pelts in the small township of Whitley City. The town, established in 1868 as a logging outpost, consisted of little more than a general store, a small church, and a cluster of wooden homes arranged along a single muddy street. According to Trading Post ledgers dated between 1903 and 1906, meticulously maintained by proprietor Harold Jenkins, the brothers would appear approximately once every 3 months to exchange furs for supplies. Jenkins's record books, donated to the McCreary County Historical Society by his granddaughter in 1948, list the items the brothers typically acquired: salt, coffee beans, ammunition, occasionally tools, and very rarely, tobacco for Elijah. The ledgers indicate that the brothers spoke little and conducted their business efficiently before returning to their property. Entry dated March 12, 1905. Blackwoods arrived at dawn, traded 7 fox pelts, 3 beaver, and 1 bear skin of exceptional quality, exchanged for usual supplies, plus 1 steel trap and a whetstone, departed before other customers arrived, paid balance of $1.37 in silver coins dated 1878 to 1881. The Trading Post owner, Harold Jenkins, noted in his personal diary that the brothers carried themselves with an unsettling quietness, and that other patrons would clear space when they entered. An entry from November 1904 states, The elder Blackwood, Tobias, stands near 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders like an ox. His hands bear the scars of countless seasons in the wilderness, yet he counts coins with the delicacy of a banker. His brother, smaller but no less imposing, watches the doors of expecting trouble that never arrives. They move through my establishment like wolves among sheep, and I find myself checking my inventory more carefully after their departures, though nothing has ever been missing. Jenkins also observed that the brothers appeared exceptionally well-fed for men who lived so deep in the wilderness, particularly during winter months when game was scarce. Their robust physicality stood in stark contrast to other mountain dwellers, who typically grew lean during the harsh Kentucky winters. When questioned about their hunting success, Tobias, the elder brother, would only reply that they had ways of ensuring the table was always full. This cryptic response appears multiple times in Jenkins's diary, entries spanning 4 years, suggesting the merchant's persistent curiosity about their unusual prosperity. The brothers' cabin stood in a remote clearing approximately 17 miles from a nearest neighbor, accessible only by a narrow dirt path that twisted through dense pine forest. According to the recollections of James Harkins, a logger whose father had once delivered supplies to the Blackwood property in 1901, the approach to the cabin was marked by peculiar arrangements of stones were placed at irregular intervals along the path. Harkins, interviewed in 1964 by local historian Margaret Wilson, recalled his father describing the stones as standing like silent sentries and how they seemed to follow you with invisible eyes. The path itself was described as unusually level and well-maintained for such a remote location. It was wide enough for a horse, but not a wagon, forcing visitors to approach in single file. The location was marked on an 1899 survey map commissioned by the Kentucky Land Office, but subsequent maps from 1910 onward omit any mention of the property or its structures. It was as if the land itself conspired to forget. The 1910 Geological Survey, conducted as part of a coal exploration initiative, shows only uninhabited wilderness where the Blackwood property should have been, despite the cabin's substantial construction, which should have persisted well beyond that date. The cabin itself, according to the few who had seen it, was unusually large for a wilderness dwelling. Constructed of hand-hewn oak logs, notched and fitted with remarkable precision, it featured a stone foundation that extended approximately 10 feet into the ground, creating what witnesses described as a full underground level, accessed via a trap door in the main room. Luther Collins, a hunting guide who claimed to have visited the cabin once in 1906, provided a statement to Harlan County Sheriff in 1908 during the belated investigation into the disappearances. His description, preserved in the case files, notes that the main floor contained a large central room with a massive stone fireplace, 2 smaller rooms presumably used as bedrooms, and a separate kitchen area with an unusual brick oven built into the wall. Collins reported that what struck him most was the brothers' collection of knives displayed on a wooden rack near the kitchen entrance. Must have been 30 or 40 different blades, his statement reads. Some I recognize as hunting or skinning knives, but others look like surgeon's tools, all kept polished and arranged by size. Elijah saw me looking and said they were family heirlooms from their father's time as a field medic during the war. Before the hunting season of 1907, the Blackwood brothers had lived relatively unnoticed by authorities. Their property taxes were paid annually through a lawyer in Whitley City, Mr. Jonathan Pierce, whose brief notes indicate that the brothers inherited the land from their father, who had acquired it during the post-Civil War land redistribution. Pierce's legal ledger, discovered in a filing cabinet donated to the County Historical Society in 1951, contained minimal information about his unusual clients. His notes indicate that he met the brothers only twice, once after their father's death to execute the will, and again in 1902 to draft a document ensuring that if either brother died, the property would pass fully to survivor, with no claims permitted from any other parties. Pierce noted that this request seemed odd, given that neither brother was known to have any other family or heirs, but he fulfilled their request without question. According to courthouse records, the senior Blackwood had been a Union soldier who received the parcel as compensation for his service. Military records accessed in 1965 by researchers identified him as Sergeant Ezekiel Blackwood, formerly of the 13th Kentucky Volunteer Infantry, Company C. His service record indicated that he served as a field hospital assistant during the latter years of the war, with a notation that he was particularly skilled in amputation procedures. Pierce's notes, found in the same filing cabinet, mentioned that the brothers' father had peculiar dietary requirements that necessitated their isolated lifestyle. In a letter to a colleague dated 1904, Pierce elaborated slightly, writing, "The elder Blackwood suffered from some digestive malady acquired during his military service. According to his sons, he could consume only very fresh meat prepared in specific ways, or he would suffer terribly. This condition apparently informed his choice of such an isolated homestead, where game was plentiful and neighbors scarce. No further explanation was provided, and medical records from that era were not detailed enough to identify what condition might have required such specific dietary restrictions. The brothers themselves had no formal education beyond what their father had taught them, and neither had ever married. Their isolation was nearly complete, except for their quarterly trading expeditions. Local children were warned to avoid the area near Pine Mountain where the Blackwoods lived, though no specific reason was given beyond the usual cautions about respecting private property. Eliza Jenkins, daughter of the Trading Post owner, recalled in a 1966 interview that her father would say, "Those who wander onto Blackwood land tend not to wander back off it." What triggered the events of 1907 remains unclear. Some suggest it was the unusually cold September that pushed game animals deeper into the mountains, causing hunters to venture further into the Blackwoods territory than in previous years. Weather records from the Louisville Meteorological Station document that September 1907 saw temperatures averaging 12 degrees below normal, with an early frost on September 10th that damaged crops throughout the region. Others point to a county ordinance passed that summer that eliminated private property restrictions for licensed hunters during hunting season, a measure designed to prevent wealthy landowners from monopolizing the best hunting grounds. The ordinance, preserved in county records, stated that from September 1st to December 31st, licensed hunters may pursue game across property boundaries, provided they do not damage structures or livestock. The Blackwoods reportedly appeared at a county meeting to oppose this ordinance, one of their only known appearances in town, but their objections were overruled. The meeting minutes note only that objection was raised by residents of Pine Mountain District, without naming the brothers specifically. Whatever the cause, it brought strangers into brothers' domain, and something in the Blackwoods shifted. The first disappearance occurred on September 17, 1907. William Thornton, a 43-year-old bank clerk from Lexington, had traveled to Harlan County with. William Thornton had traveled with 3 companions for their annual hunting trip, a tradition they had maintained for 5 years. They established a camp near the Cumberland River, approximately 7 miles from the Blackwood property. According to a statement given to the Harlan County Sheriff by Edward Rollins, one of Thornton's companions, William had told him he was going to check traps along the eastern ridge of Pine Mountain. He was in high spirits that morning, Rollins stated, having shot a sizable buck the previous day. Thornton mentioned wanting to set traps rather than hunt directly, as he believed the cold weather had driven smaller game into the higher elevations. Thornton departed camp at approximately 8:30 in the morning, carrying his Winchester rifle, a skinning knife, and a small pack containing food and water. When he failed to return by sundown, his companions became concerned. According to the sheriff's report filed on September 20th, 1907, Thornton's 3 companions waited until nightfall before searching for him. They found his rifle leaning against a tree approximately 4 miles from their camp, along with a partially filled canteen and a blood-stained handkerchief. The report notes that the rifle appeared to have been placed deliberately rather than dropped, suggesting Thornton had set it aside voluntarily. No other trace of the man was discovered. The sheriff's report also notes that a storm moved in that evening, washing away any potential tracks. A search party consisting of the sheriff, 2 deputies, and several local volunteers combed the area for 3 days, but found no further evidence. The search was abandoned on September 23rd, with Sheriff Harlan Daniels concluding that Thornton had likely suffered an accident in the rough terrain and either succumbed to injuries or was carried off by scavengers. The report's final notation reads, "Mr. Thornton's disappearance, while tragic, is consistent with the dangers inherent to hunting in remote areas." His companions returned to Lexington, where Thornton's wife would later commission a headstone in the Lexington Cemetery, though no body was ever recovered to place beneath it. A month later, on October 23rd, two brothers from Cincinnati, James and Robert Caldwell, failed to return to their lodgings in Cumberland. The men, aged 28 and 31, were experienced hunters who had traveled to Kentucky specifically to hunt white-tailed deer, which were abundant in the region. They had arrived on October 20th and taken rooms at a boarding house operated by Mrs. Edith Simmons, a widow whose establishment catered to out-of-state hunters. The men had informed their landlady that they intended to hunt deer in the southern portion of Harlan County near the Tennessee border. According to Mrs. Simmons' statement to Sheriff Daniels, recorded on October 25th, the brothers had mentioned finding promising signs near a creek that feeds into the Cumberland up where the mountains get steep. This description matches the general vicinity of the Blackwood property, though Mrs. Simmons was not familiar enough with the area to make that connection. The Caldwell brothers' horses returned to the stable, without riders 2 days after the men departed. The stable hand, Joseph Miller, reported that the horses appeared agitated but not injured and were still saddled. Mrs. Simmons stated that the saddlebags contained an unusual amount of meat wrapped in oilcloth, which she assumed to be venison. Not considering it significant at the time, and believing the brothers had perhaps gone to retrieve more game, she prepared the meat for her boarders. The meat was consumed before the brothers were officially declared missing. When investigators later questioned her about the meat's appearance or taste, she reported nothing unusual, stating only that it was tender, as if from a young animal. She recalled that one boarder, a Mr. Douglas from Virginia, had commented that it was the sweetest venison he had ever tasted, and had asked about the brothers' hunting location, so he might try his luck in the same area. Mrs. Simmons did not recall if she had provided him with this information. Sheriff Daniels organized another search party when the Caldwell brothers were reported missing, focusing on the area south of Cumberland where they had indicated they would be hunting. The search lasted 5 days but yielded no results beyond a single spent rifle cartridge that could not be definitively linked to either brother's weapon. The Cincinnati Enquirer ran a small article about the missing men on November 2nd, 1907, noting that they were presumed lost to the hazards of the Kentucky wilderness. Their parents traveled to Harlan County in mid-November, but returned to Ohio without answers. In a cruel irony, Robert Caldwell's wife was expecting their first child, who would be born in February 1908, never having known his father. A letter from Mrs. Rebecca Caldwell to Sheriff Daniels, dated March 1908 and preserved in the case file, pleads for any additional information about her husband's fate. The sheriff's response, if one was ever sent, is not included in the records. The third disappearance occurred in early November and involved a solitary hunter named Frederick Schmidt, a German immigrant who lived in Louisville and worked as a butcher. Schmidt, age 39, had traveled to Harlan County alone on November 3rd. According to the guest register at the Railroad Hotel in Harlantown, he signed out on the morning of November 5th, telling the clerk he planned a hunt for several days before returning. Schmidt never checked back into the hotel, and his disappearance was not noted until November 15th, when he failed to return to his job in Louisville. His employer, concerned about his reliable worker's absence, contacted authorities. By the time Sheriff Daniels was notified, nearly 2 weeks had passed since Schmidt was last seen. A cursory search was conducted, but winter weather had set in, making a thorough investigation impossible. Schmidt's hunting equipment, including a distinctive German-made hunting rifle with his name engraved on the stock, was never recovered. The fourth and fifth disappearances occurred simultaneously and involved two local men, brothers-in-law Thomas Howard and Peter Jenkins, who left their homes in Cumberland on November 26 for what was intended to be a 2-day hunting trip. Howard, a coal miner, and Jenkins, a carpenter, were lifelong residents of. Thomas Howard and Peter Jenkins were brothers-in-law from Cumberland. Both men were lifelong residents of Harlan County and very familiar with the mountain terrain. According to statements from their wives, who were sisters, the men had mentioned hunting in the high country. They explained that game had become scarce in their usual hunting grounds close to town. When they failed to return on November 28th, their families immediately reported them missing to Sheriff Daniels. A search party was quickly organized, made up mostly of fellow miners and neighbors who knew the men well. Despite their knowledge of the area, the searchers found no trace of Howard or Jenkins beyond their first campsite. The site looked abandoned in a hurry. The campfire had been extinguished, but their cooking equipment was left behind. A partially dressed rabbit carcass had been left to spoil. The men's rifles were missing, which suggested they had left camp armed. The sixth disappearance happened on December 12, 1907, and involved Reverend Isaiah Thornfield, a traveling preacher from Tennessee. He had been holding revival meetings in small communities across Harlan County. According to his assistant, a young man named Timothy Greer, Reverend Thornfield wanted to bring his message to the most isolated homes in the region. He believed that no soul was too remote to hear the word. Greer stated in his report that he had heard about reclusive families living deep in the mountains, and the Reverend felt called to minister to them. Thornfield left on horseback on the morning of December 12th, carrying his Bible and a small bag of provisions. His horse returned to the church in Harlan 3 days later without its rider. Inside the saddlebags was the Reverend's Bible, apparently untouched, but his other belongings were missing. Greer organized a search with church members, but like the previous efforts, it yielded no results. The final disappearance of that season, and perhaps the most disturbing in hindsight, took place on December 23rd, 1907. Mary Caldwell, the sister of the missing Caldwell brothers, had traveled from Cincinnati to Harlan County. She was determined to find out what had happened to her brothers. Despite warnings about the harsh winter weather, she hired a local guide named Jeremiah Stone. She asked him to take her to the area where her brothers had planned to hunt. According to Stone's later statement to authorities, they set out on the morning of December 23rd, following the general direction that Mrs. Simmons had described earlier. Stone reported that, as they approached the foothills of Pine Mountain, Mary Caldwell insisted on going forward alone. She wanted to reach a ridge where she believed she could get a better view of the land. Stone said he advised against it, but finally gave in and agreed to wait with the horses. After about 30 minutes, he grew concerned and followed her path. He found no sign of her. As darkness fell, he returned to Cumberland for help. A search party was formed the next morning, on Christmas Eve, but a severe snowstorm delayed them. By the time the weather cleared enough for a thorough search, any tracks or clues were buried beneath several feet of snow. Mary Caldwell was never seen again. The 7 disappearances in a single hunting season represented an unprecedented pattern. It should have triggered a deeper investigation, but several factors prevented a strong response. The victims came from different places. Many were out-of-state visitors with no local ties. The cases were spread out over several months. Sheriff Daniels, according to county records, was also preoccupied with labor unrest at the coal mines, which demanded most of his department's resources. The remote and dangerous terrain added another obstacle, especially with winter setting in. On January 8, 1908, the Harlan Daily Enterprise published an editorial about the unusual number of missing persons. The paper blamed the particularly harsh winter and an influx of inexperienced hunters unfamiliar with the dangerous mountains. The editorial ended with a call for stricter regulation of hunting licenses for out-of-state visitors. It made no suggestion of foul play. Years passed, and the events of 1907 slowly faded from memory. The Blackwood property stayed untouched until 1932, when the county reclaimed the land for unpaid taxes after the brothers were presumed dead. Neither had been seen at the trading post since December 1907. The last confirmed sighting of either brother was on December 26, 1907, when Elijah Blackwood made an unusual winter journey to the trading post in Whitley City. Harold Jenkins's diary entry from that date described Elijah as haggard and distracted. His clothes were stained, and his manner was more agitated than ever before. Jenkins wrote that Elijah traded a large quantity of meat and pelts, then bought supplies that suggested he planned for long-term travel. Preserved foods, ammunition, a new knife, and a heavy coat. When Jenkins asked about his brother Tobias, Elijah reportedly answered, "My brother remains at home tending to private matters." Jenkins also noted that Elijah departed heading west, not north toward the Blackwood property. That was the last confirmed sighting of either Blackwood brother. The land was officially incorporated into what later became part of the Daniel Boone National Forest. The deed transfer, filed on April 15, 1932, described the property as abandoned and without valuable structures. This suggested that the cabin had either been destroyed or had deteriorated over the years. No one showed interest in the remote land until 1962, when the Forest Service planned to build a fire observation tower on the highest point of the old Blackwood property. During excavation for the foundation, workers uncovered the remains of a cabin that had apparently burned decades earlier. The site report, filed by project supervisor Samuel Ledbetter, notes that the foundation extended about 10 feet underground. There was evidence of multiple underground rooms or chambers, which was highly unusual for buildings of that region and era. Among the charred timbers, workers discovered a metal box. Inside were 3 leather-bound journals, partially burned but still readable. The discovery was reported to the Forest Service headquarters in Winchester, Kentucky. Officials decided the find had historical rather than criminal significance because of the apparent age of materials. The journals were first kept at the Forest Service Regional Office in Winchester, but in 1964, they were transferred to the State Historical Archives in Frankfort. Dr. Eliza Montgomery, an anthropologist from the University of Kentucky, examined the journals as part of her research on Appalachian isolation communities. Her preliminary report, dated October 3, 1964, described the journals as a remarkable window into psychology of extreme isolation and the way remote families could develop their own moral systems. Montgomery noted that the journals contained daily entries written in 2 distinct handwritings, believed to be those of Tobias and Elijah Blackwood. From 1899 through early 1907, the entries focused mostly on ordinary details of survival: hunting reports, weather notes, maintenance of property, and sometimes short philosophical reflections. Montgomery observed that these reflections were surprisingly articulate for men who likely had very limited formal education. But starting in March 1907, the tone began to change. Tobias's entries especially grew darker. Montgomery's notes reveal that he wrote more and more about intrusions on their land. On March 23, 1907, he recorded, "Found boot prints along the Eastern Creek bed. Strangers walking our land without permission or acknowledgement. Father would not have tolerated such trespass." Over the following months, Tobias's paranoia deepened. By August, he was writing about setting new deterrents along the property lines, though he never explained what they were. Meanwhile, Elijah's entries showed growing worry. On August 17th, he wrote, "Tay rarely sleeps, spends nights walking perimeter, speaks often of father's lessons and our duty to the land. I fear the isolation has begun to wear on his mind. Yet he refuses to consider even our customary trading journey this month." The most disturbing material, however, came in the form of recipes. According to Montgomery's analysis, which he submitted to the Journal of Appalachian Studies but never published, the journals contained detailed instructions for preparing cuts of meat from what the brothers called two-legged game. The references grew more frequent in the fall of 1907. On September 18th, Tobias wrote, "Unexpected bounty yesterday. Trespasser carried identification from a Lexington banking establishment. Elijah processed the meat, while I disposed of the remainder as father taught us. The liver was exceptionally tender when prepared with wild onions and salt. We will preserve the rest using the smoking technique Father preferred for the leaner portions. Montgomery's report notes that further entries included exact methods for butchering and cooking, with Tobias showing particular enthusiasm. On October 25th, he wrote, "The older one provided better marbling in the flank portions. Elijah objects my terminology, but Father was always clear that proper nomenclature is essential to proper preparation. We are not savages. We are custodians of an ancient knowledge." Elijah's writings became increasingly troubled. On November 3rd, he noted, "Tay is merely protecting what is ours, as Father would have wanted. But Father's hunger was born a necessity during war times, not this eagerness Tay now displays. He speaks of setting lures rather than merely defending our boundaries. I find myself unable to sleep, though the meat does sustain us through these cold nights." By December, the brothers seem to be in conflict. On December 14th, Elijah wrote about confronting Tobias over the disappearance of the preacher. There was no threat there. The man merely sought to bring his God to our door. T said, "All trespassers are the same. That intention matters not when the result is violation of our sanctuary." He becomes more like Father with each passing day, but Father at least maintained control of his appetites. Montgomery's research ended abruptly in November 1964. Her paper was withdrawn from publication, and university records show that she requested a sabbatical soon after. She relocated to Oregon and never returned to the subject. In early 1965, the journals themselves were placed in restricted storage after review by the State Attorney General's office. A short memo attached to the case file stated that there was no actionable evidence to pursue incidents more than 50 years old, especially since no remains had ever been recovered. The case was officially labeled as a matter of historical interest and archived. In the years that followed, interest in the Blackwood story did not disappear completely. In 1966, a folklore collector named Martin Ridley traveled through Harlan County, recording oral histories. That year, he interviewed Abigail Jenkins, the 87-year-old daughter of the Trading Post owner who had personally known the Blackwood brothers. The transcript of this interview, now kept in the American Folklore Collection at the Library of Congress, contains a chilling account. "My father rarely spoke of the Blackwoods," Jenkins told Ridley, "but there were things he told me near the end of his life that he had kept secret for decades." According to Jenkins, her father once told her that in December 1907 Elijah Blackwood came to the Trading Post alone, behaving more erratically than ever before. Father said Elijah's hands trembled so badly he could barely count his coins, she recalled. His clothes were stained dark in places, and he smelled of smoke and of something Father said was like a slaughterhouse. He traded an unprecedented amount of meat, which he claimed was venison and wild boar. But Father noticed it was wrapped differently than their usual offerings. Elijah entered the store with a strange air about him, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone to follow. When Jenkins's father asked about Tobias, Elijah grew agitated. He then said something so disturbing that Jenkins's father remembered it word for word. "Tobias has developed a taste that cannot be satisfied with animal flesh alone. I fear he is changing into something my father always warned about." Elijah paid for his supplies with several gold coins, not the usual silver. When Jenkins's father asked about this, Elijah explained that the coins had been taken from a trespasser's pockets. Before leaving, he warned, "If Tobias comes looking, you never saw me. For your own safety, remember that." Elijah never returned to the Trading Post again. The following spring, several belongings of missing hunters appeared for sale in Knoxville. A pocket watch described as belonging to William Thornton surfaced in a pawn shop. A distinctive hunting knife, once owned by one of the Caldwell brothers, was recognized in a general store by a hunter from Cincinnati. No connection to the Blackwoods was ever proven. Authorities dismissed the discoveries as coincidence, suggesting scavengers had stolen the items from abandoned camps. Jenkins also shared a chilling secret her father had never put in official reports. He had eaten some of the meat Elijah brought in that last visit, and became violently ill. Jenkins said, "Father told me he had never been so sick in his life. His body seemed to reject it, and he could not keep food down for nearly a week." On his deathbed, he confessed what he had long feared. "Abigail," he told her, "I believe I ate human flesh that day. I carried this knowledge like a stone in my gut for years. There was no deer or boar Elijah brought in. I have hunted all my life and know the taste of every animal in these mountains. What I tasted was something else entirely. May God forgive me for it." When Ridley asked if Jenkins's father ever reported this suspicion, she said no. Who would have believed him? And by the time he was sure, years had passed. The Blackwoods were already gone. The physical evidence of what happened in 1907 has mostly disappeared. The Blackwood cabin was destroyed by fire, believed to have been deliberately set. Forensic analysis in 1962, during the construction of the fire tower, found that the fire had burned at an unusually high temperature consistent with accelerants. The report noted multiple points of origin, which did not match accidents like lightning or chimney fires. Because the site was so old, no investigation followed. In 1967, before the fire tower was completed, workers found stone-lined pits half a mile from the cabin. Each was about 6 feet deep and 8 feet across, lined with fitted stones and once covered with heavy wooden lids. Inside, bone fragments were discovered. Dr. Walter Richardson, a forensic anthropologist, examined them. He declared they were non-human, likely deer or boar, and noted that the cut marks matched common butchering practices. His report, dated June 8, 1967, recommended construction continue. The pits were filled in and covered. But Dr. Richardson's original notes, obtained years later through a Freedom of Information Act request, tell a different story. Some larger bones had unusual cut marks not consistent with ordinary game butchering. The precision suggested anatomical knowledge beyond that of typical hunters or trappers. He admitted that human remains could not be ruled out. The fire tower itself lasted only 7 years. It was decommissioned due to structural problems and unexplained equipment failures. Rangers stationed there often requested transfers, complaining of strange noises and a constant odor of cooking meat, even in the remote location. One ranger, David Coleman, filed a detailed report in August 1970. He wrote, "At about 2:15 a.m., I awoke to the sound of several people moving around the base of the tower. When I called out and shined my flashlight, no one was there. Yet the sounds continued for almost 20 minutes. The next morning, I found numerous footprints circling the tower in the soft earth, but no tracks leading to or away from the area." Coleman requested transfer immediately after. His report was filed but never investigated. The tower was dismantled in 1974. The land was later designated a wildlife conservation zone with restricted public access. Perhaps the most chilling evidence comes from outside official channels. In 1968, a private collector of Civil War memorabilia, Herbert Simmons, bought a trunk of documents at an estate sale in Knoxville. Among them was a letter dated January 3rd, 1908, written by Elijah Blackwood to a cousin in Tennessee. Recognizing the Blackwood name from regional folklore, Simmons took the letter to Dr. Montgomery, who had just resumed teaching at the university. Dr. Montgomery authenticated the letter by comparing the handwriting with Elijah's journals, confirming its likely legitimacy. The letter, written on water-stained paper and fading ink, contained a kind of confession. "Dearest cousin," it began, "though we have never met, I write to you as my last remaining blood relation, according to father's records. What I must confess may never reach your eyes, for I doubt my resolve to actually post this letter. Yet I must write the truth somewhere before I depart this world, or lose my mind entirely." Elijah wrote that his father, Ezekiel Blackwood, had taught them that human flesh carried special properties, strength and longevity, if consumed regularly. According to Elijah, Ezekiel had survived the harsh winter of 1865 while serving in the Union Army by eating the flesh of fallen soldiers. This became an addiction, he passed on to his sons through both teaching and practice. Father taught us, Elijah explained, that certain men, those who live clean lives and abstain from spirits, provided meat that nourished not only the body but the spirit. He called it ultimate sustenance and believed it extended his life beyond natural limits. He trained us to identify suitable subjects, to prepare the meat in ways that preserved its essence, and to dispose of the remains so that nature herself would conceal the evidence. After Ezekiel's death in 1899, Elijah and Tobias abstained, living on normal game. But in the winter of 1901, when a trapper lost in the mountains sought shelter in their cabin, Tobias reverted. He killed the man, claiming self-defense, as the stranger had become delirious with fever and threatened them with a knife. Elijah recalled, "But I saw the look in my brother's eyes as he prepared to meet, the same hunger that had possessed father in his final years." The brothers made a grim compromise. They would only eat those who trespassed on their land and posed some threat. But in 1907, when a county ordinance brought more hunters into their territory, Tobias's hunger grew uncontrollable. He began deliberately hunting men. Elijah wrote, "He set traps not for animals, but for men. He studied their movements, their camps, and chose targets with precision. Father once taught us to choose prime deer. What had once been reluctant necessity became eager pursuit." On Christmas Eve, 1907, Elijah discovered Tobias cooking a stew with the remains of a young woman searching for her missing husband. Among the discarded belongings, Elijah recognized women's garments. Father had been explicit that women were never to be considered suitable. Something had changed in Tobias. He consumed not for sustenance, but for pleasure. The expression on his face as he stirred that pot haunts me still. That night, Elijah claimed he killed his brother. I struck him from behind with father's old army shovel as he bent over the hearth. I told myself it was mercy, not murder, for the brother I had known was already gone. I poured coal oil over everything and lit the flames, hoping to purify what we had become. The letter concluded with Elijah's admission that he was leaving for the West, tried to escape the hunger that never left him. "I feel it still, cousin," he confessed. "The craving father planted in us. In my dreams I taste it still, and I wake famished for something deer and rabbit cannot satisfy. I go west to lose myself where no one knows the name Blackwood. Yet I fear that what father awakened in our blood can never truly be put to rest. If there is a God, may he forgive us for what we have done in these mountains. I know I shall never forgive myself." The collector who found the letter in 1968 tried to alert authorities but was told the case was closed. Too much time had passed, and there was no evidence for prosecution. The letter's current location is unknown, as the collection was dispersed after the collector's death in 1969. Dr. Montgomery, who had read and transcribed the letter, refused to discuss it further. He only remarked, "Some historical materials are best left unexamined." The legacy of the Blackwood brothers lingers in an unsettling fact. The southeastern portion of what is now Daniel Boone National Forest has one of the lowest visitation rates in all of Appalachia. Despite abundant game and beautiful vistas, the area is rarely traveled. A Forest Service analysis in 1978 found that both hunters and hikers avoided the section of forest once belonging to the Blackwoods, even when they did not know its history. Local guides refused to take groups there, citing dangerous terrain or protected wildlife. Jeremiah Holbrook, a hunting guide interviewed for the report, said simply, "There are places in these mountains that don't welcome human presence." That's one of them. Animals know it, too. You won't find deer or turkey in that hollow, no matter how good the foraging might be. Park rangers admitted there was an unofficial policy of steering visitors away from that section. One ranger explained, "We don't put it in the official guidelines, but new staff are quietly told to direct people elsewhere." Too many incidents over the years. Equipment failures, unexplained injuries, hikers reporting disorientation, even with compass and map. He admitted, "There's something not right about that hollow. Animals avoid it. Plants grow wrong there. twisted somehow, even though the soil and sunlight are no different from the surrounding areas. We just tell people the area is being rehabilitated. When asked for details about these strange anomalies, the rangers usually gave vague answers or quickly changed the subject. The coordinates that once marked the Blackwood cabin no longer appear on any official forest maps after 1970. In fact, topographical surveys deliberately seem to skip the area, leaving a small but obvious blank space in an otherwise carefully documented forest. Officials claimed this omission was just a surveying error that was never corrected, but several former Forest Service employees have quietly suggested it was intentional. Perhaps even more unsettling is what happened to those who tried to investigate the Blackwood case. Dr. Montgomery, after studying the journals, abandoned her academic career and took a quiet teaching job at a community college in Oregon. She refused to ever speak of her research again. Thomas Carter, the journalist who filed a Freedom of Information Act request in 1978, published only one article in a small regional magazine and then dropped the subject forever. When later contacted in the early 1980s, he refused to comment, saying only, "Some stories carry consequences for those who tell them." Martin Ridley, who had interviewed Abigail Jenkins, died suddenly of a heart attack just weeks after submitting his recordings to the Library of Congress, despite having no history of heart issues. Dr. Chet Richardson, who examined the bone fragments at the site, requested reassignment to a California university and never published in forensic anthropology again. Over the decades, the Blackwood story has been reduced to little more than a local campfire tale. People speak of two strange hermits who may have attacked trespassers, but the darker parts of the story have been erased, perhaps out of a shared desire to forget. Still, rumors persist. Some hikers claim to have found odd stone formations or strange metal tools in the unmapped section of forest, but no official investigations have ever been made. In 1992, a backpacker reported finding a stone-lined pit much like those described in the 1967 Forest Service reports. Yet, when rangers went to the coordinates, nothing was there. The backpacker later retracted his statement, saying he must have been lost in the dense woods. The last official reference to the case appears in a 1973 internal memo from the Kentucky State Police Archives. It ordered all materials on the 1907 disappearances to be placed into deep storage, with instructions that they must be preserved, but not digitized and not listed in any public catalog. Curiously, the memo included one final note: annual verification secure containment required. Why would files from a case more than 60 years old need yearly security checks? No explanation was ever given. When a Freedom of Information Act request was filed in 2002 to access these materials, it was denied. Officials claimed the case was still under investigation, even though it had been closed for decades. When pressed, they said it was just an administrative error, but still refused access. Even today, hunting licenses issued in Harlan County include a map with shaded zone marked simply, environmentally sensitive area, no hunting permitted. That zone matches exactly the former Blackwood property. No official reason is given for the restriction. Locals know better than to ask. They simply avoid the place, especially in autumn, when predators grow hungriest. The mountain has guarded its secrets for more than a century. Perhaps that is for the best. Back in 1968, while researching the story, a journalist from the Louisville Courier-Journal traveled to interview elderly locals. Most refused to speak on record, but one man in his 90s finally shared a chilling perspective. "The mountains remember what people try to forget," he told the journalist. "Those brothers weren't the first to have strange appetites in these hills, and I doubt they'll be the last. Some hungers don't die with the men who felt them. They sink into the soil, seep into the water, and wait for someone new to feed them." The journalist's article was never published. His notes were later found in his abandoned car near the forest's edge. He himself went missing, only to resurface in a Nashville hospital under a false name. He had no memory of the 3 days after the interview. He left journalism soon after. When contacted again in 1969, he refused to discuss the case. He only said, "Some stories aren't meant to be told. Some appetites shouldn't be remembered." Maybe he was right. Or maybe by forgetting, we only let those appetites grow hungry again. What is certain is this: something happened in those Kentucky woods in the autumn of 1907. Something that turned 7 disappearances into a legacy of whispered warnings and averted gazes. The official records may be sealed, the witnesses long dead, the evidence eroded by time. But the hollow where the Blackwood cabin once stood is still empty of wildlife and of people. In a forest alive with sound, that silence says more than words ever could. And still, the land is restless. Since that time, the eastern ridge of Pine Mountain has been struck by unexplained fires. No lightning, no campfires, yet flames appear, burning fiercely in late September or October. Strangely, the fires never spread beyond the old Blackwood boundary. After each blaze, rangers report finding strange arrangements of stones, circular patterns like cooking pits, as though recently used, even though the area is off limits. Perhaps it is only wind and rain moving the landscape. Or perhaps, as the old folklore warns, some hungers never die. They burn eternal, rekindled each autumn, when strangers once again step into the ancient woods of Harlan County, Kentucky,